We ought to study history observationally and sympathetically. Observationally means we need to look at all the details that surround an event, do the best we can to reconstruct the event, and to keep that kind of cool, objective arm's distance from the event, and for the sake of understanding. And understanding is the first job of the student of history. Today, under Howard Zinn, 1619 Project, critical race theory, the purpose of history is to change the world. It's action, and it's radical action. But the liberal mindset for the history of Western culture, which is self-critical, which is devoted to learning, which is devoted to wisdom, to all the excellences of the mind, the first objective should always be to understand. And to understand, you have to observe. And that's how we learn about ourselves, is by observing people in the past who've lived out their lives in the same constraints as we live, and to observe them sympathetically. And that brings me to my second principle for studying history. Sympathy means, of course, to move with others who suffer. That's probably the most familiar meaning. And it is true. All humans suffer. And they suffer in lots of different ways. The other meaning of sympathy is that we have a natural affinity for all things human. There's another notion of having a liberal mind, that is to say, to be open to the whole of truth, to the whole of goodness, to all lives, and to the whole of our history, not to some reducted part of it. So that would be my approach to history. And that's the way I think students of history ought to approach the past. Sharpens their minds. It also deepens their heart about what it means to be a human. We are not perfect beings. No society is perfect. But you don't have to be perfect to be good. You just have to be human. And that's why you need to be sympathetic. But in order to be a human who uses his or her reason to the best of one's ability, then you have to seek understanding first. And then, having accrued a lot of practical wisdom from history, you can deliberate about what choices to make, but only after you understand things. Today, there is a movement that's very powerful to look back at the past and condemn it for being different than what our lives consists in. And we take our own contemporary values and we superimpose it on the past. That's called anachronism. It's also called moralism. And a real historian will not do that. A real historian will look at the past in its pastness. And it's different from our own time. And that's, in a sense, that's the first reason why we study history, is to understand the past. And the second reason is that, following the change that happens, we look at how changes have brought us to where we are today. And thirdly, we look for the residues of the past around us. So we think about, for example, the rich American tradition in which we're devoted to equality, to education, to opportunities for everyone. Just take that one topic, education. Most people don't know this, but in colonial America, there were almost no schools. Almost everyone was what we would call homeschooled. And it was a combination of humanities, some mathematics, and the skills that were requisite, say industrial skills, requisite to farming. And then another layer of education came at the local church community. All the families would gather, all the farm families on these self-sustaining farms would gather on Sunday, and it would be a long event where you'd have a worship service, but also extensive study of the scriptures. This was a huge part of the moral and imaginative training that Americans had at the founding. We, of course, eventually developed public schools, in no small measure under the impulse that we're not going to have an aristocracy. We're not going to have a monarchy. We're not going to have a privileged class. James Madison, for one, who was an aristocrat of sorts, he recognized that given our constitutional republic, we're going to have leaders from all sectors of society. You think of an Abraham Lincoln, who was poor and got very little formal education. But Madison, for one, recognized that in order to have leaders emerge from every sector, we're going to have to afford them an education they couldn't afford otherwise. So he was an early advocate of publicly funded schools and publicly funded scholarships to schools like Princeton, where he studied.